Hello, everybody. My name is Matt, and I'm an organizer for Fridays for Future. And I just want to thank you for coming out today. And I am so delighted and honored that I am here today with Judy and the Women's International League for Freedom and Justice. Peace and freedom. And justice too, yes. As we commemorate the second anniversary of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And, it's really important to connect the dots between different movements. I'm in the climate movement, and climate and war go hand in hand, and we need to address both of them. So I am just so delighted to be doing this together with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom today. And with that, I would like to introduce Judy, who is a co-sponsor of this event. Judy?
Thanks, Matt, and thank you for coming.
Go ahead and talk straight into it.
We are going to have some speakers, and then we're going to take a slight break to do it. Okay, hi, welcome to our event. I'm with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, founded in Europe in 1915 and established here in the Peninsula Palo Alto in 1922. Normally, today we're on the street corner of El Camino and Embarcadero, vigiling silently. But today, which is a couple days before the second anniversary of the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we are gathered two organizations, one concerned about the environmental effects of a nuclear detonation, whether in war or an accident or a terrorist act. And WILPF is also concerned about the environmental effects, which would probably be what's been called nuclear winter, which would really devastate the planet. And the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which has a committee on disarmament to end war. And our first speaker is Cheryl Spencer, who's from our Peninsula Palo Alto branch, and she will talk about the treaty itself. Now, to my right, we have two tables with information about WILPF and the treaties, and to the left, a nice display of signs that Matt has put together. So, Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. And we are celebrating the second anniversary of the entry into force of the TPNW, as we call it. Can you all hear me? Even closer?
Yeah. Right up to the mic. Yeah, if you can just speak right up to the mic.
So I'm a member of the Palo Alto Peninsula Branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I'm also the co-chair of our National Committee on Disarmament and Ending Wars. WILPF US has 40 branches all over the country and about 40 sections all over the world. We're an international organization. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to explain why this nuclear ban treaty, which is its nickname, is so important to all of us, and how our US militarism is a root cause for two existential threats to humanity: nuclear weapons and climate catastrophes. The only times nuclear weapons have been exploded in war happened 78 years ago, when two nuclear bombs were dropped by the US on Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths of civilians. Some experts say it is mostly good luck that has kept any more nuclear weapons being used in a hostile way or being set off accidentally since 1945. Now we have a terrible war being fought between Russia and Ukraine, with the veiled threat of Russia using nuclear weapons if other countries send their soldiers to Ukraine to fight against Russia. This threat has raised the public's awareness of nuclear weapons. The only way to ensure that a nuclear weapon will not be set off is to not allow them to be made in the first place. That is why WILPF and thousands of other peace organizations are working towards the abolition of nuclear weapons from everywhere on Earth, and why this relatively new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is so important. Let me remind you what is a treaty. An international treaty is a binding formal agreement, contract or other written instrument that establishes obligations between two or more subjects of international law. Treaties are primarily made between states, as the UN calls them, countries we call them, or sovereign nations. In order for a treaty to become binding upon the United States, our US Senate must provide its advice and consent to treaty ratification by a 2/3 majority. This is a very difficult bar to leap over. Consequently, the US has not ratified many treaties that most of the rest of the world have ratified. The United Nations have developed and passed other treaties and international laws that pertain to nuclear weapons. For example, Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights declares that every human being has the inherent right to life. This right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her life. Based on this right to life, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has concluded that the threat or use of nuclear weapons violates our right to life. When countries wage war, they are bound by the international laws of war, and one of those laws says you do not target or kill civilians during the fighting. An exploding nuclear bomb affects such a wide area, it will kill and maim civilians. So it has never been legal to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons. And these laws of war are already incorporated into US law, so the United States should not even contemplate using nuclear weapons. The TPNW was born out of a deep concern of the world's governments at the growing threat that nuclear weapons pose to human survival, the environment, socio-economic development, the global economy, food security, and the health and welfare of current and future generations. It was initiated at a special UN conference in July 2017, and in order for it to come into force, 50 countries had to sign and ratify it. That threshold was passed on January the 22nd, 2021, 2 years ago, and that is why we are celebrating the second anniversary of its entry into force this weekend. So it's a legally binding document leading, we hope, to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. So far, 68 countries have ratified the TPNW, and another 92 have signed it, indicating their intention to ratify. The treaty has 20 articles, and the first article is the most important one. It lists the various prohibitions covered by the treaty. I'll just read it quickly. All states party are prohibited from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, transferring, possessing, stockpiling, using, or threatening to use nuclear weapons, or allowing nuclear weapons to be stationed on their territory. It also prohibits them from assisting, encouraging, or inducing anyone, not just countries, but anyone, companies, for example, to engage in any of these activities. The US, Russia, and China, and 6 other countries still possess over 15,000 nuclear weapons. The vast majority of those are several magnitudes more powerful than those dropped on Japan. So it's more important than ever to bring an end to these awful weapons. Prior to this treaty's adoption, nuclear weapons were the only weapons of mass destruction not subject to a comprehensive ban, despite their catastrophic, widespread and persistent humanitarian and environmental consequences. So the TPNW fills a significant gap in international law, and we have to persuade the 9 countries who still own nuclear weapons to sign and ratify the TPNW. History shows that the prohibition of certain types of weapons facilitates progress towards their elimination. Weapons that have been prohibited by treaties are increasingly seen as illegitimate, losing their political status and along with it the resources for their production. As more countries ratify the TPNW, we hope nuclear weapons will lose their political status, arms companies will carry more reputational risk, and investors will shun them. Some pension funds have already divested from such companies. There's a very large Dutch pension fund that won't have anything to do with any company that has anything to do with nuclear weapons. So we must pressure our politicians at all levels to endorse the TPNW and get more cities to become nuclear weapon-free zones. Hundreds of US cities have already declared through ordinances and resolutions to be nuclear weapon-free zones. Could we persuade Palo Alto to do that? Not while Lockheed Martin has facilities here in Palo Alto. And Lockheed Martin is one of the companies that helps to design and build the missiles that deliver the nuclear weapons to one's enemy. So in the Midwest, we have about 450 underground silos. Each one contains an intercontinental ballistic missile tipped by a nuclear weapon, ready to be sent off by just the president. Has to be the person who can make that order to send off these weapons. So you can imagine that Russia has a similar amount of ICBMs pointing at US cities, and because ours are pointing at Russia. And I would bet you anything that there is an ICBM in Russia with the GPS of Palo Alto programmed into its computer that tells it where to go, okay? So later on, we're going to do a die-in. We're going to help us imagine what it might be like, or would be like, if a nuclear weapon was to be exploded either over Palo Alto or close by. San Francisco nuclear weapon detonated over San Francisco would affect us here almost as badly. So, Lockheed Martin is one of those companies that design and build the missiles. So our households pay taxes to the US government, and every minute about $71,000 of your tax monies are being paid to make nuclear weapons for the US. In 2020, $27.7 billion was given to 12 US defense companies to design and make nuclear weapons. So this is why we would much rather those $27.7 billion be given over to human needs. US militarism is the root cause of the threats of nuclear weapons and the threats of climate catastrophe. The US military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels in the world and the worst polluter. The carbon blueprint, we call it, of the US causes global warming, leading to extreme flooding, droughts, crop failures, forest fires, and rising sea levels, leading to climate refugees. There are 1,200 US in the world military bases that contaminate the land and the drinking water sources with the so-called PFAS, forever chemicals, and they seriously impact the unborn children and adults. So looking at the defense budget that every year the US Congress appropriates, $850 billion for this fiscal year. Carrying that out for 10 years, that means $8.5 trillion are going to be spent on defense, so-called defense. Compare that to the $3.5 trillion that are promised from the infrastructure help that was act. So we have to get this TPNW agreed to by more countries. It's a hard push to get the US and the other military countries that own weapons to do it. But as more and more countries sign and ratify the TPNW, the US will become more and more isolated in its use of them. So WILPF invites you to join us in this very important work. Contact information is on the desk over here, and we welcome you to take part in the die-in shortly. Thank you very much.
It's called Bring Back Our Tax Dollars.
Our taxes fly over the ocean to fund the overseas wars, but our taxes are urgently needed right here for the jobless and poor. Oh, bring back those taxes and spend them here. Bring back. Think how the Earth's people will cheer. Our bridges and highways are crumbling. Our teachers and schools need support. The money that's now spent on killing should be used to wage peace, not war. Oh, bring back those taxes and spend them here. Bring back, and think how Earth's people will cheer. We should be supporting our students who struggle to pay their loans. And we should be supporting our families while the banks just foreclose on their homes. Bring back those taxes and spend them here. Bring back, think how the Earth's people will cheer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that brought your attention to our next speaker, Sharat Lynn, who will be performing at the end of the die-in. And Sharat, welcome to us again. And he is in his beautiful costume of the migratory monarch butterflies. He's not supporting monarchs necessarily, but the butterflies. Sharat?
Yes. Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you, Matt, for co-organizing this. So my name is Sharat Lynn. I do the Dance of Peace. I'm also with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center and Human Agenda. And you will often see me dancing around with this as a monarch butterfly for a number of reasons. It started because it was a symbol of migration, and it was a way of supporting, the right of immigrants in this country. But the butterfly is a beautiful metaphor for so many things, and it's a very peaceful animal, a symbol of peace, and so it's great for opposing nuclear weapons, among other things, opposing war. And we here in this country have a special responsibility for war, for nuclear weapons, because the United States was, after all, the first country to develop nuclear weapons, the only country in the world that has ever used nuclear weapons on a civilian population back in 1945. The butterfly is also a metaphor for nature, for preserving our planet, for stopping climate change, and it's also a metaphor for freedom, for the freedom of human beings to live a dignified life, and for human rights. So for that reason, it's almost a universal metaphor for peace and social justice. I want to talk a little bit about I went to Japan, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki a few years ago to see the incredible commemorations of the U.S. atomic bombing of these two cities, in which a total of over 210,000 people were killed. These were almost entirely civilians. 210,000 people were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the atomic bombing. And there's a mythology here in this country that these atomic bombs were dropped to end the war sooner. But this is a complete myth, and was created, of course, to justify the bombing. And the reality was, this was at the end of the Second World War. Emperor Hirohito had delivered, through his ambassador, delivered a message to Joseph Stalin, because Japan had relations with Russia, with the Soviet Union at that time, delivered a message intended to be delivered to President Harry Truman, that Japan was ready to surrender. This was in June 1945, so almost 2 months before the atomic bombs were dropped, that Japan would surrender on there's only one condition, and that is that the institution of the monarchy be preserved. And Truman received this message. He decided to go ahead with the atomic bombings anyway, because the United States wanted to prevent Russia from entering the war and then taking credit for the defeat of Japan, and also to enable the testing. This is a very sad thing, that the U.S. actually went ahead with these atomic bombings to actually test these weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations. This is why the first bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was a uranium bomb, and why the second bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. This was deliberate, to see the bioeffects of two different weapons. It's a very dark moment in our history, so we have a special responsibility for it. Now, the question of nuclear weapons comes to the fore again today because of the war in Ukraine, because Russia is a nuclear power, and the threat of nuclear weapons again raises its ugly head. But I want to emphasize that this is not a war that was unprovoked, as the news media always tell you, that this is an unprovoked, that Russia's invasion was unprovoked. The United States has a critical role in it, in encouraging fighters in Ukraine to continue to besiege the eastern provinces of Lugansk and Donetsk, an 8-year war that has killed 15,000 people. This is before the Russian invasion of January 24th last year. And the fact that the United States has been the driving force for NATO expansion, driving force for Ukraine to join NATO, for Georgia to join NATO. And if you look on the map, you find that Georgia, I'm talking about the country, not the state. So the country, Georgia, is not even in Europe. And they want Georgia to become a part of NATO. So NATO is an obsolete entity. It was supposed to have been dissolved when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Instead, it has only been used not for the defense of Europe, but for a war, an unnecessary war in the Balkans, an invasion of Afghanistan, and the dismemberment, I mean, effectively, in terms of governance, the dismemberment of Libya. So it has led to chaos. So we need to disband NATO, we need an end to NATO expansion, we need an end to nuclear weapons. And I want to say one more thing, and that is, there's one other treaty on nuclear weapons that has been out there, but it has not been terribly helpful, and that is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. The NPT, in effect, has been a means for the P5, that is to say, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the original 5 nuclear powers, to preserve their monopoly over nuclear weapons. And now 3 other countries have become nuclear powers and have sort of been been reluctantly allowed into the nuclear club without much fanfare. Those are India, Pakistan, and Israel. Two other countries are the subject of a great deal of vilification, demonization, and sanctions: North Korea and Iran. Now, Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. It has a nuclear program. And of course, a lot of these technologies are dual use. They can be used for nuclear power. They can also be used for nuclear weapons. We don't know what direction Iran is actually heading. But the point is that there's one standard for Iran and for North Korea, which has actually developed the nuclear weapons, and another standard for the eight other nuclear powers. And so the NPT has never been a treaty that would really end the use of nuclear weapons. So the TPNW takes on great added importance, because this is the way forward. This is the way, if the great powers, starting with the United States and Russia, which have by far the majority of the nuclear weapons in the world, take the initiative to end their nuclear programs, the other countries will follow suit, including North Korea, including Iran, including Israel, India, Pakistan. They'll follow suit. They have said so. So it starts with us to end nuclear weapons, and this is why it's so important that we move forward, that we, the American people, demand our government to sign the TPNW and end our nuclear program, engage in a new round of disarmament talks with Russia and the other nuclear powers to phase out nuclear weapons once and for all. Thank you.
Sharad.
Could you pull the mic down?
Clearly, Sharad is not just a performer. Matt,
Yes.
do you want to say some words for the environmental?
Yes.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Oh, see, I have a big voice. I'll stand back. So my name's Matt, and I organize Fridays for Future here every Friday. We're facing the dual threats of the climate crisis and the nuclear weapons crisis. Next week, they're going to publish the doomsday clock, and always they highlight that we're now facing more than just a nuclear threat. We're facing the threat also of the climate crisis. So we come out here every Friday to make sure that people are aware that we're in a crisis and we all need to start to care enough to do something. And I am just so grateful to be around you all, because I can tell you care so much, and it's very heartening to me. And we're doing this in Palo Alto, in front of City Hall, in King Plaza. And we have commemorated this plaza to Martin Luther King and his wife, Greta King. And I think it behooves us to remember some words from Martin Luther King when he said about 55 years ago that his country, our country, is the biggest purveyor of violence on the planet. And that was when we were in a war in Southeast Asia, a proxy war with another nuclear superpower. And now here again we are, 55 years later, and we're in another war, in a proxy war with the other superpower, and it's in Europe, of all places. Who would have imagined that we would be here now, 55 years later, and now we're in a confrontation with a nuclear-armed superpower, and I think it's really important to remember at this point just how close we always are to nuclear annihilation if we don't pay attention to it. And a lot of these wars are fought over fossil fuels. And so it's an excuse for us to fight over fossil fuels and to use a lot of fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel companies love it when we go to war. And the arms manufacturers love it when we go to war. And who's paying for all that? We are. We're paying for that with our taxes. So we need to just recognize that and recognize that we have the power to make the change. And the way we're going to do that is to continue to build our movements. I think the biggest thing that the US government did to defang the peace movement was to eliminate the draft. Because when everybody felt an imminent threat to their lives, they took to the streets. Probably some of you here were taken to the streets. And once they eliminated that, what happened? It took the wind out of the sails of the peace movement. And now here we are in a war in Europe, and we need more people in the peace movement again. And I was inspired last week by a young climate activist named Greta Thunberg, who is the inspiration for our movement, because she traveled from her Sweden down to Lützerath, Germany, and protested the opening of the dirty lignite coal mine in Lützerath, Germany. And that coal mine is being opened back up because of the war in Ukraine. So this is all connected. It's all connected. So I just want to thank you all again for your dedication to this, and just let you know how much I am inspired by you all. And it just encourages me to dedicate myself that much more to this. So thank you.
I'm wearing two hats, figuratively and partially literally today. As a peace activist during the Trump presidency, I had a hat that said, which was blue, that said, "Make the Arctic great again." You know. And today, to honor Friday for a Future and the environmental movement, I'm wearing the California State Parks hat. Okay? So our groups meet every Friday at different locations. We meet the WILPF silent protesters at the corner of El Camino and Embarcadero, and they meet here. And I thought, you know, for the occasion, in advance of the second anniversary of the TPNW, let's meet together and express our joint concerns environmentally and for world peace and survival, that we would meet together. So part of our plan was to do a die-in. And we've made a circle that was in the sun when we made it, that is surrounded by, from Disarm Nuclear War, these little flyers that's say no to nuclear weapons. And we have chalked in the figures representing people who've attended today doing a die-in. Now, a die-in has been used by protest movements for many years. Sometimes it's used to block a sidewalk by lying down and putting on your chest or back the name, let's say, of an assassinated black person who was harmlessly engaged with the police. We're not doing it to stop traffic. We're doing it to think, what would we do, as Cheryl said, what would happen to us, our families, our communities, our buildings, our homes, our environment. What would we do with a direct hit near Palo Alto, let's say at this plaza? Well, we would be vaporized instantly. The destruction would go out in concentric circles from ground zero with mass destruction. And nuclear winter. The nuclear winter is not something we want to go through. So we've brought today petitions supporting the TPNW and other petitions that relate to nuclear disarmament. And on the second table, to my right, some information about membership in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. By the way, we welcome men as well. But we didn't want to make the organization name too long. So I'm going to ask you, if you can, to take a chair and sit in the circle that we've created, or take a knee, you know, like the sports figure, or stand with head bowed, and
Or sprawl on the ground.
or sprawl on the ground. We have, I think, someone chalked who did that, maybe. For about 3 or 4 minutes. And think about the effects, the things that we've heard today. And think about what you can do. I intend to give the attendees today here these little signs to take home, and I have some more, to take home and put in your windows. Say no to nukes. Give them to friends. Take some extra flyers from our table. Take them to your church group, your book group, your friends. So then you will be called at an all clear signal, which will be my saying all clear. And Sharat